Kansas City Chiefs have won the Super Bowl 31-20, the final score for Miami overnight, beating the San Francisco 49ers behind by 10 points heading into the final quarter. But that boy, Patrick Mahomes, once again delivers the goods. Good morning to you, Mike Carlson, or good night. Thank you very much for staying up.
Yeah, well, Miami Beach, I suppose 1:30 in the morning is probably quite early for most of the people who aren't in their hotel rooms talking to Ireland.
Yeah, we're basically talking to you before the night gets started for you, Mike Carlson. Was it ever in doubt that Patrick Mahomes would deliver these moments, and I want to call them moments, in the final quarter, especially after a pick he had thrown, a couple of picks by the end of the game, that he would actually step up and achieve what everybody expected him to achieve last night?
I think it was in considerable doubt because for three quarters, San Francisco had played a pretty good defensive game. And in the third quarter, they had dominated the game to the point where 10 points down, I said, they're not out of it by any means because Mahomes can make one play and put them back into it. But you also thought that San Francisco would be able to at least do enough offensively in the fourth quarter to make it difficult for them to engineer that comeback. But Mahomes, with a combination of a couple of times managing to escape being sacked when it looked like San Francisco would have him sacked, and a couple of times of just throwing brilliant passes on the move, looking for people who were open, led them back. They took the lead, and at that point, their defense made a couple of big plays. Chris Jones, especially, batting down two passes from Jimmy Garoppolo, one of which would have been a really crucial long completion had it not been batted down. And at that point, it all fell apart for San Francisco. If you look at the stats at the end of three quarters, Jimmy Garoppolo looks like a Super Bowl MVP, and Patrick Mahomes looks like someone who got a little nervous maybe in his first Super Bowl at age 24, or maybe just was the victim of a great defense. But it was an amazing game because it was interesting from start to finish, and it was back and forth. Kansas City stopped San Francisco, held them to a field goal on their first drive, came back and took a lead. San Francisco tied it and then should have gone ahead at halftime, but there was a miserable offensive pass interference call on Jimmy Garoppolo's best throw of the day, right at the end of the second quarter. Then San Francisco completely dominated the third quarter, and Kansas City, against the odds, dominated completely the fourth quarter. It was just back and forth between two really good teams, I think, that were prepared for each other, and they both had to overcome obstacles. And for me, the big takeaway will be whether Kyle Shanahan is blamed for being. There's only been 3 Super Bowls where a team has lost a 10-point or more lead, and he's coached in 2 of them.
Yeah, I was just about to say, when you suspected that the 49ers might be able to do enough offensively to prevent the Chiefs from winning the game in the end, that kind of is hauntingly familiar to the 28-3 scenario, that it didn't matter what the Patriots would do, you suspected that Falcons offense would do enough to actually see out the game. And I know it's only a 10-point deficit and possibly a better Chiefs offense to that Patriots offense at the time as well, but it's impossible not to make that parallel, Mike.
I think that's right. There were 2 drives in the fourth quarter which both began with successful first down runs that set them up for the kind of offense that we saw in the third quarter. And both times they passed on the next 2 downs unsuccessfully. That's where those batted balls came. And you just got the feeling that had they stuck to that, they might have been able to engineer a drive long enough to make it difficult for Patrick Mahomes to get the 2 scores they needed. Because the final score, that last touchdown, it was a brilliant run by Damian Williams, but it was basically just glazing, frosting on the cake. The game was basically a 4-point game at that point.
Yeah, for sure. A couple of things have come out from the past overnight, the main one being a tweet from Patrick Mahomes in 2013 saying, "I bet it feels amazing to be the quarterback who says, I'm going to Disney World after winning the Super Bowl, #QB. So really his dreams coming through overnight. And I do wonder, I know we can get bogged down on the winner in these occasions, and if the Chiefs had not pulled this comeback off, people would have been looking at the 2 picks that Mahomes threw. Whereas at times in that first half, Mike, I thought that Mahomes looked pretty comfortable in his own skin. He had taken to the stage fairly well, just in terms of how he moved. Like, they were obviously attacking him, trying to get him out of the pocket as much as possible, and he was okay with that, I thought. Now, the picks obviously would have been something that people would have thrown back at that argument and said, well, actually, that shows that somebody may have panicked in a Super Bowl. But I think, all things considered, even if you take away the full comeback in the fourth quarter, this was a fairly good first outing in a Super Bowl for Mahomes.
Yeah, and I think to some extent he had to settle down into what San Francisco were trying to do to him. And he did to an extent in the first half, but then San Francisco upped their defensive game. One of the picks he threw came the next play after Nick Bosa had batted the ball out of his hands when he was trying to pass. On the very next play, he rushed the pass a little bit because he had another pass rusher coming right at him, and he misread, I think, the coverage and threw badly for the pick. The other one was a batted ball. It wasn't a good pass either, but it was a batted ball. A lot of his throwing was off earlier in the game. It looked like he was pressing a little too hard because his short throws, he was passing behind the runners and he was throwing them very hard. He was throwing a few balls into the ground. And I think to an extent what happened was in the fourth quarter, he reached that stage where you stop thinking about what you're doing so much and you just start playing the game. And he looked very calm. He looked very much in control. And when those San Francisco rushers came in, they had decided they would only rush 4 people. And the other 7 were pretty much playing back in coverage, 5 of them across because Kansas City runs a lot of 4 receiver sets, and then 2 deep for coverage, and occasionally 1 deep, and that's 1 deep is when they got burned by Tyreek Hill on that one big chunk play they needed. And that was the kind of thing that Kansas City has killed people with all year. You think you've got them under control. Mahomes escapes for a run. Mahomes gets an extra second and hits that long pass that all of a sudden puts them into great field position. And really that was the story of the game. A lot of us said before the game, it looked like a really, really balanced game. I took the 49ers, with no great, it's going to be the 49ers for sure, but thinking they were the better balanced team. There were more ways that they could win the game, but Mahomes was the X factor. You had to stop Mahomes. Mahomes was like the one player on the field who might be able to take the game over by himself and win it for you. And that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah, Tyrann Mathieu said it's like watching Denzel Washington in a movie. It's like watching LeBron James in the playoffs. He has that spark. For him to be that young and to find the confidence to do what he did against a special defense, that tells you everything you need to know about that man. And he's only the third quarterback, I think. I know. It's in front of me here from ESPN. Joining Tom Brady and Terry Bradshaw as the only players to win Super Bowl MVP despite throwing multiple interceptions, which really, I think, is the statistic that sums Mahomes' night up.
Yeah, and I think too, you have to give him a bit of credit because San Francisco's defense was so good. And you say it was so good, and they were still scoring points, in quick bursts, which is what they've done all season. I loved the bit when they were trying to interview Andy Reid on the field, and Patrick Mahomes was there for the next interview, but he couldn't get, they couldn't get him out of Andy Reid's grasp, basically. And you could see the kind of relationship that the two of them have. And you mentioned Disney, and of course, when Patrick Mahomes mentioned Disney, a whole lot of people won money betting that the Super Bowl MVP would mention Disney as his first thing. So that was one of many novelty bets that paid off in this game and plus halftime show.
Talk us through Andy Reid's night, because on the outside looking in, it seems just like an absolute masterful performance from the coach. We described him last week as possibly the best coach to have never won a Super Bowl as a head coach. It seems that he can take a lot of credit for how many times the Chiefs got their hands on the ball last night in the important times of the game.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And, I think Andy Reid probably didn't make as big a thing of the monkey on his back, that this sort of quote unquote failure to win a Super Bowl. had been. Like a lot of the great coaches who didn't win Super Bowls, he's produced consistently good teams over a while. And to win the Super Bowl, you do need things to break the right way for you. And he didn't make the kind of game management, clock management mistakes that people associate with Andy Reid. I think it was significant that Damian Williams was carrying the ball when they actually needed to wear out the clock with a lead. And he's the perfect relaxed coach for a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes, who's going to make a few mistakes, but who you can count on to produce points in bunches when you fall behind. And we saw that in the playoffs. They were down 24-0 to Houston in the first quarter, and there was no sign of panic on the Chiefs bench. There was no sign of even a grimace from Andy Reid. He just looked relaxed and, told Patrick Mahomes to go out and do what he normally does. And next thing you know, the Chiefs are leading 28-24 at the half. And that was the kind of attitude we saw here. I don't think there's anybody in football, including 49ers fans, who begrudge Andy Reid winning his first Super Bowl.
No, absolutely not. I think everybody's delighted for him. Everybody kind of has this joy whenever they see him on the sideline. I think he said he's going to celebrate by eating the world's biggest cheeseburger or something like that in the aftermath. Andy Reid doing Andy Reid things, I guess. Like, just a quick word on the 49ers before we wrap up. Obviously, Kyle Shanahan has had a number of big disappointments, I think it's fair to say, in the Super Bowl at this point in his career, but he is still recovering and he's still getting back to these positions. They have unbelievable weapons on both sides of the ball. I think one of the maybe underrated aspects of last night was a proper defensive versus offensive matchup in Bosa versus Mahomes, which we actually rarely see when it's like one individual versus another. Sometimes it can be the full defense against another. Like, they clearly have the weapons to come back again next year. What do you think? Do you think that they will do that? Do you think that there is a Super Bowl in this team?
Yeah, I think it's actually probably going to be easier for Kansas City with the young quarterback still on the rookie deal and in a division where they're the class of the division right now, and you're going to need to see improvement from the Chargers or the Broncos or the Raiders to compete. The problem for San Francisco is that they're in a tougher division, especially with Seattle as a natural rival there, and the Rams are going to be a good team, and Arizona is probably going to be an improving team, and Arizona played them tough this year despite losing. So that's one problem. And the second one is holding that defense together, because Bosa obviously is a great weapon, but the strength of that defense is the fact that they've got a deep front four, which is always going to be effective, and that makes each guy more effective. I think they can do that. I think they'll be looking to probably improve the secondary a little bit. I think Emmanuel Sanders is a free agent, so they probably need another receiver to come along. And both their offensive tackles, who were hurt for much of this year, are getting older. Joe Staley may have played his last game. I don't know. So yeah, there's rebuilding there, but they're going to have a slightly tougher job of it. But Shanahan did such an amazing job this year offensively, and they won against a pretty tough schedule. I was thinking at one point this game could have turned into the 48-46 kind of shootout that they had with the Saints, which to me was one of the games of the season. But the defenses took over and played really well, and I thought that was really, it's going to be like the unsung story of this is that for 3 quarters San Francisco played great defense, and for 1 quarter Kansas City played great defense, but it was actually a really good defensive game, keeping both these teams down to that few points.
You've kind of already mentioned what the 49ers are going, or not what the 49ers, what the Chiefs are going to do next season, and going back to back is obviously an insanely tough task in the NFL, but it's interesting when you look at the teams that have done it over the last 30 years or so, and you look at the quarterbacks. You've got Troy Aikman, you've got John Elway, you've got Tom Brady. These are all-time great quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes fits that mold, so that's the most important key, it seems, going back to back.
I think that's a great point, Owen. And so many of the dynastic teams in football, and so many of the great coaches in football are tied to a quarterback. Bill Walsh and Joe Montana, Paul Brown and Otto Graham, Brady and Belichick. in almost every case. The great coaches are great because they had a great quarterback or because they could bring along a great quarterback. And I think Andy Reid and Mahomes have a chance to be in that kind of race. One of the things Andy Reid does very well and did in Philadelphia is to draft and sign for the future, so that they had Mahomes, but let Alex Smith start for his first year. They drafted Mahomes while they had Alex Smith. And this year they drafted McCole Hardman to replace Tyreek Hill if he were to get suspended. But he's also now the long-term replacement for Tyreek Hill if they lose him to free agency. And that kind of team building is what you need to do in order to win consistently and win championships. And the big advantage for Andy Reid right now, like I said a minute ago, is he's probably got a path to a couple of championships before the rest of the division catches up to him. And that's been part of the reason why Bill Belichick's been so good, because if you can win your division and get into the playoffs, ideally with a bye week, you can win 3 games, against teams that may be better than you, or one of the 3 teams may be better than you on paper. Once you're in those games, you've got a chance to win them, but you have to get into those games first. So being the class of your division is a good way of establishing that dynastic dominance. And he's got a chance to do that at least for the next, 3 to 5 years, maybe, at which point Andy Reid probably retires anyway.
Yeah, it's certainly exciting times to be a Chiefs fan at the moment.